Hey everyone, and welcome to my top 100 films part 2. And I went off screen as I did that. I'll do that again. So yeah, I have been counting down my 100 favorite films. I already did part 1, which was numbers 100 through 76. This is going to be 75 through 51, part 2 of 4. And I'll get into it much quicker this time. I won't explain it that much. I'll just remind you before I get started with these that we are doing a thing where you guys can submit your top films. You're submitting your top 50 lists of movies, and you can submit that to an email, which is at mftvquestions@gmail.com. And if you go do that, next month, the deadline's at the end of the month, end of August 2019, and next month there'll be a results video where I will read off the top 100 movies as voted for by you guys. Now, again, you're not submitting a list of 100, you're submitting a list of 50, your 50 top. And the idea is that your number one gets the most points, so make sure you number them and rank them in the correct order, make it very clear what's the start, what's the end, so on and so on. And number one gets the most points, 50 gets the least points, and there'll be a results show, and hopefully that'll be fun. So if you want to get interested in that, just make sure to leave your name. One that was already sent in did make a point of asking if I was going to use any of your names to use their YouTube handle, and then gave me what that was, which is obviously okay. If you, I don't know if I will use your names in any way, but in case I do, if you don't want me to use the name that you put in the sign it with, if you want your YouTube handle, just tell me what that is and say you'd like me to use that instead, and I'll do so. So yeah, go do that. And without further ado, let me get back into my top 50. Number 75 is Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, which is a film by CHAN-WOOK that came out in 2002, the first of his Vengeance trilogy. And this is one that maybe gets overshadowed sometimes because Oldboy exists, but Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is a very different film, and I love how it plays both sides of a conflict. The film is primarily from one protagonist's point of view for the first half. It's a 2-hour film, and the first hour is from one character's perspective. And it's a sympathetic character, but it is very much it's got that mixed tone that Korean cinema does so well, where it can balance this absurd humor with dark storytelling, with serious drama, and make it all just effortlessly come together. It's something that I love about Korean cinema that other countries just don't know how to do. It's insane how good they are at it. But it has that, and then it shifts to a different protagonist for the second half, which typically I would say that's a weird choice, but it's obviously a very intentional one here, where you get two sides of a conflict, and you see both sides. And ultimately, revenge typically is usually a theme that you see how revenge and the need for it destroys someone, and it is very much a tragedy of a story, and there's a lot of really uncomfortable feelings as you go throughout this one. But I think everything's captured so well. There's so many greats. It's a very quiet film. There's not a lot of music. Unlike Oldboy that has this fantastic soundtrack, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is a very quiet film, which actually ties in because one of the protagonists is actually deaf, so it actually plays with that in a lot of ways. But you have compelling characters, you have unique, absurd sort of moments of violence, but you also have genuine heartbreak, and you see all the sides of the dispute, and it really makes it a far more enriching film because of that. And ultimately, you feel like everything's just going to keep getting worse, and there's a great feeling that comes along with that. So no one does vengeance like Park Chan-wook. Number 74 is Locke, which came out in 2004. Well, it says 13 here from IMDb, but it didn't really get released to the public until 2014, because I had it at my top film of 2014, and I stand by that because that's when everyone actually got to see it outside of some festivals. But it's directed by Stephen Knight, and it is the film where Tom Hardy is on his own in a car for 90 or so minutes, and I think this film's fantastic. I think it's an acting tour de force from Hardy. And for any Venoms that he's done, he has Locke to then counterbalance it and say, no, look at this, he's phenomenal. And it's a story about him leaving his very important construction job. He's like the head, he's the foreman or whatever, and he leaves the night before this big multi-million-dollar contract is going underway, and this build is starting, and he leaves. And the film's about why he's chosen to do this, that he is a man of honor, and he takes his job very seriously. He spends the whole film on the phone talking to people about the job, trying to make sure it's covered in his absence, and getting shit from people that he's let down by doing this, and so on and so on. But also, and I won't spoil it, but where he's going, why he's left, and where it is he's going to. And then very neatly throughout the course of the film, it's such a great character study because it builds up the reasons why he does everything so well, and the motivations, and why he can't just let this thing pass that he's on his way to and just stay at his job. His life has been turned upside down because he has to kind of do this. He has to do it for himself. And I think it's a phenomenal film. You're skeptical when you hear about it. You think, 90 plus minutes in the car, he's just on the phone the whole time. So there's other actors, obviously, over the phone doing voice work, but he's the only actor that we really see in the entire thing. And I saw this in theaters, and I was riveted basically from start to finish. It was such an intimate film and this intimate character study. I think it's a great example of what you can do with a very simple premise, but just have a good script. A good script, a good actor, and a good director. And I know that sounds like really easy, but it's not. It's hard to get all those things to line up. But if you do have all those things, you can take almost nothing and turn it into good storytelling. And Locke is an example of that. Number 73 is Basil the Great Mouse Detective, or just Great Mouse Detective, depending on your location. This came out in 1986 and has 4 directors, as is I think more common with the Disney animated stuff. Ron Clements, Bernie Mattison, David Michener, and John Musker. So, Great Mouse Detective is a very unique film on this top list. It's a very unique film because I'm not a big Disney animated guy. I don't have anything against them, but I don't have a lot of attachment to a lot of those films, and I'm not a big musical numbers guy, so a lot of them don't appeal to me, really. So, but for whatever reason, I saw Great Mouse Detective at a young age, and I grew up with it, and it means a lot to me. And I think it's surprisingly dark. I think it's the villain, like Ratican, has this great menace, and of course he's voiced by Vincent Price, which is phenomenal. This was when I finally got around to watching Vincent Price movies, probably in my late teens, if not my 20s, when I started like exploring that part of cinema. It never occurred to me growing up that, wait, I knew that voice. Like, as soon as I heard his voice, it sounded familiar, and it's because he's the villain in Great Mouse Detective. It's phenomenal. And the film is unique in that it's one of the few films growing up that I remember having a Scottish character, bizarrely. So maybe that meant something to me. I don't know if it did. But if you don't know what the premise of Basil the Great Mouse Detective is, it's Sherlock Holmes, but he's a mouse. And the villain, Moriarty, is a rat. And it is beautiful. It's got so many fun sequences. It's got great animation. It actually has CGI in it, which, for the time was kind of a big deal. And that final sequence, that final big fight that takes place in the clock tower in Big Ben is absolutely, it's a horror movie. It really is. This film gets surprisingly dark with the stuff it does, and I think it has so much atmosphere. I love the rainy opening. I love the score. I bought this on Blu-ray when it came out. I imported it from the US as soon as it was released, and I think it was region locked, but I've got a multi-region player because I'm that guy. And I hadn't seen it in years. I hadn't seen it in at least 10 years at that point. And that was maybe back in like 2012, 2013, something like that. And I hadn't seen it... probably more than that, because I don't think... I never had it on DVD. I kind of skipped over that phase of my life. So I think the last time I had seen it was my VHS copy that I taped off TV that I gave up in like 2000 or something like that, maybe 2002. And who's to say how long it had been since I'd watched that copy of it as well? I don't know. But I knew I loved that movie, and I bought the Blu-ray, and I remember when the title screen hits and the music kicks in, just being filled with feelings. And yes, it does have some music numbers, and I'm not a huge fan of those typically, but with this one, it doesn't matter. I just love it. I just love it from start to finish. It's so good. I love it. Number 72 is The Sixth Sense, which of course came out in 1999 and is directed by M. Night Shyamalan. Sixth Sense has got a hell of a history behind it at this point. It's kind of memed to death. Its twist ending is almost impossible not to know. I'm not going to say it here because I thoroughly believe that you should be able to watch anything from any point in history and not have it spoiled, as long as you sort of take it upon yourself to do that. And what I mean by that is I don't believe in putting spoilers in headlines. I mean, I accept that if you click on an article about The Sixth Sense, or you click on a video talking about The Sixth Sense, that you should expect spoilers, because of the idea of the spoiler window being over. But I don't think that justifies just shouting out spoilers randomly where no one can choose to opt out. I feel like you should still have that opportunity to say, no, I want to save that for myself. No, even if the movie's from 1950, you should still have that choice. I thoroughly believe. So I'm not going to. So because this is obviously a video about a lot of movies, I'm not going to just drop spoilers for The Sixth Sense, as much as all of you watching probably know what the ending is. But that ending's a big deal, and it really works for the movie. It's one of those things where the entire movie is enriched, and the second viewing is so benefited from it. And Bruce Willis is great in this. This was when Bruce Willis gave a shit. Haley Joel Osment, young kid actor, who I actually just recently seen on The Boys. He had a part in that, which was fun. And you even have Toni Collette in there, who's really good as his mother. It's this great creepy story about loss and accepting people. And it's such a, because obviously you think of the ghosts, and obviously the ghosts are a big part of it, but it's so much about moving on in so many different ways. And I think The Sixth Sense is more than just its twist ending, but its twist ending enriches the entire thing and helps make the point that the film wants to make. It's not just about, oh, gotcha. Plus, it's excellently directed, and it's, there's a reason why everyone thought M. Night Shyamalan was going to be the next biggest thing in Hollywood, and he almost was for a brief period. Obviously, he went off a cliff a few movies in, but Sixth Sense, I think, holds up, and I think deserves recognition for what it is, and I would always still stick up for it and recommend it. I absolutely would. Number 71 is The Cabin in the Woods, which came out in 2012 and was directed by Drew Goddard, and of course was co-written with Goddard and Joss Whedon, who created the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In fact, Drew Goddard also wrote on that show as well, funnily enough. And Cabin in the Woods is a movie that I was looking forward to because I was a Whedon fan. I knew Whedon had co-written this movie and produced this movie, and it was on the shelf for a long time for whatever reason. Probably got released finally because Chris Hemsworth's in it and he became a star because of Thor. And I was looking forward to it. And funnily enough, I remember that this came out a couple of months before Avengers. It was like the March before Avengers came out in May or something around there. And I remember feeling like, oh shit, I get two Whedon movies like so close together. After not having anything Whedon for a few years, the last Whedon thing that was in existence really was Dollhouse. Maybe Dr. Horrible was after that, but Dr. Horrible, was my least favorite thing that Whedon had done. It was because it's just not as much for me. And I was so pumped about having Whedon content. But what I love about this movie in that context of looking for kids is that, yeah, there's some Whedon humor in there, and it does make me laugh a lot. It's a very funny movie. But it's completely different from other things that Whedon has directed. Obviously, Whedon likes to subvert a lot of tropes in his work, and that is a big part of Buffy and Firefly and all these other things that he's done. But this entire movie is a horror comedy subverting the tropes of the slasher genre. And I would argue that it does a better job of that than Scream or other movies like that. Scream was always the one that was brought up, and I like Scream a lot. This is not me dissing Scream. But I think The Cabin in the Woods is just that much more playful. And I remembered seeing it knowing very little about it. Like, I knew they went to a cabin in the woods because of the title. I don't even think I'd seen a trailer. I remember going into that movie knowing absolutely nothing. So the reveal of the plot, which I will say briefly what the plot is, it's about a group of characters who are going on this vacation to a cabin in the woods. They're all college age, and turns out there's a secret government lab which controls this place and is directing all of the events that will befall them that evening. And of course it gets into some really wacky stuff. In fact, Richard Jenkins and Bradley Whitford, I just remembered his name there. Those two characters in the lab are just phenomenal. Like they're my favorite part of the movie. I love that stuff. Every time it goes back to them, I'm laughing. I think they're hilarious. the way it plays upon horror movie tropes, and like this was a it's funny because I never really associated Joss Whedon with my horror fandom. I always seen him as a separate thing to that. And it's weird with this. Obviously, it's very critical of the horror genre in a lot of ways, but it never even occurred to me that he was also at least into horror enough that he would want to make a movie subverting all these genre tropes. So yeah, and obviously there's some Whedon actors in there. Amy Acker's in the lab, and Frank Kranz is one of the things. And honestly, I think the third act is like one of the most balls out, ridiculous, fist pumping like third acts I've seen in a long time. I remember getting to that final act and just how crazy the movie gets and going, this is so great. They've turned the volume up so much for this final section. It's one of those things where you come out of it and go, I don't want to spoil a thing in that final like 30 minutes, because that final 30 minutes is, you know, in a lot of ways does become the best part of the movie, and you're glad that the movie's evolved beyond what it originally was. But it's, you know, it's constantly surprising, it's constantly funny, and yeah. I mean, as far, I mean, if we're going to call this like one of my comedies, then it's definitely one of my favorite comedies. Number 70 is, and this may surprise some people, but Star Wars. And I know, I give Star Wars a lot of shit. I give Star Wars a lot of shit because of its prequels, because it's oversaturated now, and I'm not like super into the mythology. What I like about Star Wars, and when I say Star Wars here, I am of course referring to the original Star Wars. I'm referring to what is now called A New Hope. And I like this movie a lot. I like the original trilogy quite a bit. And here's the thing, I don't really give a shit about Jedi. I don't really give a shit about that side of the mythology. This whole space monks thing is kind of whatever to me. What I like about Star Wars is that it's an adventure, and it's an adventure with characters that I like. And for me, the interaction between Han and Luke and Leia, with a bit of Chewie, of course, and Obi-Wan, is what I like about Star Wars. And it's why, even though I still like Empire a lot, I actually prefer this movie over Empire. Yeah, spoilers, Empire's not appearing on my top 100. And I like Empire a lot. I'm not dissing Empire. Like, Empire is a really great sequel. It's a pretty great movie. But one of the things that I'm not as big on it is that it separates the characters, and I don't necessarily like that Luke's away with Yoda. In fact, Luke being with Yoda is like my least favorite part of that movie. Like, honestly is. And because I'm not really into the Jedi stuff, I like the adventure with the characters being together, and it's them meeting each other for the first time. It's them bickering. It's them running around in stormtrooper outfits. It's them going to the Death Star and like sneaking around. And like it's this adventure movie. I love all this stuff in the original Star Wars. And for me, that's what the fun of Star Wars is. I don't care what make and model of Han's blaster. I don't care about a time when the Jedi Council was functioning. If anything, what I do know about the Jedi was more interesting when it was just this kind of almost mythical thing that has been gone for a long time, and there's just remnants of it left. The minute in the prequels we get them around a table, like discussing what they should do with the Senate and whatever else, like, I hate all that. I hate it with a passion. So, yeah, like, Star Wars is a great movie, and as much as I give Connor a lot of shit, and I give the others a lot of shit, because I'm sick to death of how much Star Wars there is now, and the Star Wars land, there's merchandise everywhere, there's all these things. The original trilogy is really good, and the best one for me is the original Star Wars, because it's everything I like about that franchise in one movie. Whereas I think Empire is really great, I still don't like it as much as this. And Return of the Jedi has some great stuff in it, but it does have Ewoks, and it's definitely the cheapest one, I'll say. It feels like we're running around a jungle a lot in that movie. So, or a forest, whatever it was, I can't remember. It's been a while since I watched it. Anyway, so Star Wars is very good, and obviously all the practical effects are great, good cast, all these different things, and it's a miracle that a movie directed by George Lucas ended up being as coherent as this is. Many a story has, or many, I don't know if it's like a confirmed thing or it's more just like myth and rumor, but that it was saved in the edit because the original cuts were a bit on the rough side. But Star Wars is a tight movie. And yeah, number 70. Number 69 is Pulp Fiction, which of course is Quentin Tarantino, 1994. And this was not his first film, of course, Reservoir Dogs. Pulp Fiction is the one that kind of blew him up, and is often referred to as his best film. A lot of people think that he's never topped this, and you'll find out if I think that later in the list, potentially. Or, yeah, if I get to number one, there's been no more Tarantino, then I guess I agree with that. If I have more Tarantino, then obviously I disagree with that. But Pulp Fiction, of course, is an anthology-style film with 3 main stories told throughout, with sort of a bookend as well. And this movie is, like, it's insane, like, how good this movie is when you think about just that there's not really that much through line in terms of, like, a story that kind of comes together. Like, obviously there's the bookend and whatnot, but it's... This movie is as successful as it is, and is as enjoyable to watch as it is, because of the characters, the insane cast across the board who are playing these characters, and the dialogue that is getting thrown back and forth. And obviously the direction is very solid. Very, very, very solid, because Tarantino's a good director. I don't think it's his best directing style. I think his directional style gets better as he kind of went on throughout his career. But this movie is full of iconic scenes. It's full of iconic lines that people quote. It's got this energy to it. It feels like, you know, this young Tarantino, basically, after proving himself with Reservoir Dogs, got keys to a bigger kingdom and did this weird magnum opus, which is full of violence and harsh language and gimps and everything else that's thrown around in this film. It's insane. It's an insane movie for what it is, and it's just oozing in style. You know, just little moments like Uma Thurman doing the, you know, don't be a square or whatever, and she draws it and it comes on the screen, or like the one as they go around the 50s bar or the 50s restaurant where the dancing is in the middle, and the argument over the $5 shake, which of course is aged, because I feel like I wish I could get a milkshake for $5 now. So yeah, Pulp. I don't know what. This is one of these movies where I don't even know what to say to you. It's Pulp freaking Fiction. Number 68 is Raiders of the Lost Ark. Steven Spielberg directed, came out in 1981. Oh, this was one that I didn't actually see until my mid-late teens. I got the DVD box set back when it was only 3 movies, you know, so long before Crystal Skull came out. But, you know, it was relatively late in the sense that I never saw them growing up as a kid. I never saw any of the 3 films. It wasn't until I was buying DVDs myself in high school that I was going around all the various things. I'd bought the Godfather box set. I'd bought, the Spaghetti Western box set. I was buying all these like box sets of trilogies and classics and franchises that I hadn't gotten to naturally through my taping things off TV as a kid kind of era. And while it makes sense for some of them because they're more mature franchises, they're not really for kids. Raiders, Indiana Jones, like, it's weird that I never saw those as a kid. Especially, I saw a lot of Spielberg as a kid. I had tons of Spielberg movies as a kid. But Raiders, I didn't. And watching this, on DVD, and one of the unfortunate side effects of growing up in the 90s and watching a lot of movies on TV and taped off TV, and even the few VHS that were purchased, which there was only a handful, the downside to that is that you were seeing everything essentially in pan and scan. And of course, I didn't know any better at the time, but there was something special about seeing some of these classic movies for the first time properly in their aspect ratio and widescreen. And Raiders is a really pretty film. It's one of Spielberg's prettiest, actually. It's got a very distinct style that fits its time period and its sense of adventure. And Harrison Ford is fantastic in it. He's oozing charisma, of course. As is Karen Allen, who is so energetic and feisty. And the villains are great. The practical effects are great. Just the raw action of it. The fight under the plane where the propeller's going. The car chase where he's jumping around from truck to truck and whatever else. Like, all of this stuff is just really exciting, and it's one of these things where I regretted that I didn't grow up with it, but at the same time I love that I got to see it like this. Obviously the music's fantastic. John Williams, all that stuff. it's one of those things where it immediately became clear why this is the classic that it is, why it's loved by so many. And I've seen it a few times since. It's a great movie. I watch it every few years, which for me is normal for the great movies. If anything, it's a bit more frequent because it's an easier watch than say something like, I don't know, pick a 4-hour epic. And I think I fell in love with it immediately. And instantly, it kind of shot to near the top of my Spielberg list, or did it? Is it the very top of my Spielberg list? You'll find out. But yeah, it was one of those things where it didn't matter that I didn't grow up with it. It instantly felt like I did, even though I'd never seen it. Yeah, and obviously it's about tracking the Ark of the Covenant and beating the Nazis to it. Like I don't, the plot's not even that important. Not in this. It's Harrison Ford as this suave hero. Well, I say suave, a bit more gritty and disgruntled hero, but a little bit suave. But Raiders, I mean, it's great, it's fantastic, and yeah, what's more to say? One of the things about doing a top 100 list is there's so many classics on here that I almost feel like, what's the point of saying anything? You've heard every reason why these movies are great your whole lives. But here, yes, Raiders, fantastic. Number 67 is 12 Years a Slave, which came out in 2013, directed by Steve McQueen. Not to be confused with the actor, who I'm sure has been dead for a long time. But 12 Years a Slave is, of course, a very emotional film. It's a very hard-hitting film. It's not what you would call a pleasant watch. And arguably, I don't think any of Steve McQueen's films are a pleasant watch. This is not a director who likes to go for the heartfelt, feel-good story. He goes for hard-hitting. He goes for darker parts of our society and our history, whether that be something like, in this case, like slavery, which is this awful, like, widespread thing, or something that's more personal and traumatic, like some of his other films. And this film, like, has a fantastic score by Hans Zimmer. It has great performances. Chiwetel Ejiofor, if I'm saying his name remotely correct, forgive me if I'm not. Fantastic. It's full of great cast, and it's just this really personal story that obviously is about this bigger thing, but it focuses on this one person, and it really goes through the breakdown of this character and the breaking of his spirit over this time. And I always say one of the things that's great about cinema is that it can take a subject that you might not have that much experience with or knowledge of, and it can not only educate you to a point on it, but it can also do it in a way that makes you empathetic. It's one thing to hear about a period in history, it's another thing to see it through the eyes of a person who lived it. And obviously it's an actor and it's all these things, but the beauty of cinema is that we can get as close as we can. We can get to a point. And this film puts you through the ringer with this character, and it puts you in a place where you feel genuine despair, where you're kind of broken over the course of the film. And because it's based on a true story, there is an element of knowing that eventually at the end there's maybe going to be a bit of a brighter future, but it doesn't matter. It's a soul-destroying experience that is immaculately directed and performed. And this was another one I saw in the theater, and it was a very intense experience. I always remember the movies I see in theaters where I'm sitting there, kind of at the end when the credits roll, just kind of, I have to take a minute to sort of compose myself before I get up and walk out. This is not the end of some blockbuster where I just walk out and maybe I've got a smirk in my face, maybe I'm miserable because it was shit. This is one where I'm sitting there and I have to really kind of process my feelings on it just for a minute before I leave. And it's phenomenal. And Steve McQueen is one of the best directors working right now. And I can't wait to see what other subjects he tackles, because everything he's done so far has been, if not up to the same standard as this, has definitely been a unique and composed take on whatever it is he's doing. So, yeah, 12 Years a Slave is a film that I think everyone needs to see. It's a film that they need to show in schools. It is. It's a harsh film, and obviously not super young, but I think it's a movie that you show to people who are, I don't know, over 14 or something like that. I don't know. People can pick the age, and I realize that it's R-rated or whatever, but I feel like for the purpose of raising people with empathy. I think something like 12 Years a Slave is a really important film. 66 is The Abyss, which was directed by James Cameron and came out in 1989. Woohoo! 1989 is a good year because I came into the world in 1989, right at the end of the 80s. So The Abyss is a science fiction film set underwater station where... You know, describing this is... They're basically investigating something. They're a civilian oil rig, and they're investigating something. And we have this great cast. We have, Ed Harris. We have Michael Biehn, and there's something mysterious going on under the water. And they encounter some weird things, and it leads to some discoveries. And I'm being very spoiler free, but let's just say there is, it becomes science fiction. There's a science fiction element to this, because everything I said up until now has not been science fiction-y. But that's where it goes, without spoiling anything else. And this is a frustrating film for me, if you've heard me ramble about this before, and you probably have. But I have not been able to watch this in over 15 years, despite the fact that I love it so, because there's still no Blu-ray, there's no HD master of it properly, because James Cameron's not approved one yet. And the DVD, while I would still watch things in SD if that's the only way they're available, the DVD is not anamorphic, which means that watching it on a modern TV is a lot like watching a blown up 360p YouTube video. Maybe even less than that. I don't know what the exact resolution of non-anamorphic standard def widescreen is, but it's not good. It looks... Even when I was watching this back in the day, it was weird that it wasn't anamorphic. Like every other DVD I had was anamorphic that was in widescreen, and this wasn't. So it always looked kind of rough compared to everything else I watched at the time when I got the DVD back in like 2000 or 2001 or whatever it was. So the weird thing, though, is here I would recommend to only watch the special edition. Not that the theatrical cut is bad, but the special edition adds in so much to the meaning of the film and so much of the action of the film that I would just never recommend watching the theatrical one. I would watch the longer cut every time. And I love the setting. I love the visuals of this film. I love the sort of the journey into the unknown element of it. There's a great kind of like protagonist antagonist kind of duel going on as well between the military group that's come under to kind of take over and our heroes who work on the rig. And there's this camaraderie, there's this feeling that they're kind of looking out for each other. And so much of the film kind of ends up being about human nature and the relationships that we build. And that becomes key to dealing with the science fiction element in the third act. It feels like a really big, expensive movie, of a sci-fi movie that might have existed in the 50s, but with an even better, I don't want to say even better script, because there's well-written sci-fi movies in the 50s, but just a little bit less cheesy, a little bit more of the times, but harkening back to the type of sci-fi stories that might have been told then. The sort of thing that could, this is a mega budget 80s thing that could have almost been a Star Trek episode in a lot of ways. But it's great. It's got great tone. I love the feeling of this film in so many ways. It has, of course, one of the first big examples of CGI in a movie. Not the very first. I mentioned, even just a few entries ago, I mentioned Basil the Great Mouse Detective, which did have some CGI in its otherwise 2D film. But this has something where you can clearly see almost the prototype for the T-1000 at one point in this, with a sort of water effect that's used, which I have to imagine blew minds in 1989 when people saw it. Not that a lot of people saw it, because I don't think it did very well at the theaters, which is a shame. It's an often overlooked Cameron movie, which is a shame, because I love it. And for me, it's kind of like upper tier. It's like fourth for me. So yeah, the Abyss is fantastic. I love it. I love it dearly, and I hope I can get to watch it again in decent quality. Number 65 is Touch of Evil, which came out in 1958 and is directed by Orson Welles. This is a film that I think is phenomenally directed. The opening, especially if you watch, this is actually another one with a lot of cuts, because of its sort of, I don't want to say butchered. I mean, I've never watched the original theatrical cut, because it's not the preferred one. You want to watch I think it's the restored cut it's called, or something to that effect, on any of the Blu-rays or wherever you're getting a chance to see it. But the opening is this fantastic one shot, and it kind of really goes around the locales of the where we are, and sets up this action and introduces its characters before there's this explosion, this car explosion, which is linked between the Mexican cartel and a corrupt police officer played by Orson Welles. And we have what's his name, Charlton Heston. I forgot his name there, who's just married Janet Leigh, and he's the Mexican sort of investigator who's here to try and work through it. And once he starts to suspect that Orson Welles is corrupt and hiding things or planting things, the film's really about just how despicable this character is and the lengths he goes to cover himself up. And it puts Charlton Heston and his wife in the crossfire. And it's just a phenomenal story about a really, really awful character. Now, of course, there is one elephant in the room here that we have to address. Charlton Heston, as I just said, is playing a Mexican, which is not right in any way, shape, or form, and is just no. That's all I've got to say about it, is just no. You have to get over that if you want to enjoy the movie, unfortunately. But the movie's so good otherwise. Like, you know, it's this giant mark on a movie that is phenomenally directed, has some of the best characters in it, the villain in particular, and is just so slick and full of filmmaking. And of course, Orson Welles, has directed Citizen Kane, directed a bunch of stuff that kind of invented a lot of techniques that are just standard and used by many now, and kind of changed the way that cinema looks, for lack of a better term. And this film is just another example of that. It's such a confident film. Gorgeous black and white imagery, lots of shadows, there's a lot of villainous, there's a lot of low angles on Orson Welles himself, who plays the villain, the corrupt cop, and of course he's also directing it, so he knows how to do that. He knows how to do it to such a great extent. My cat's causing some chaos behind the monitor. I don't know if it moved my camera there, but apologies if it did. So yeah, Touch of Evil is great. There is that one thing you have to get over, which is certainly uncomfortable, but the filmmaking is such a part of the advancement of cinema that I think you have to. You don't have to. If you want to ignore it because of who Charlton Heston is playing, I can understand that. But I think if you want to just look at it as it's a movie of its time, accept the mistakes it made, acknowledge them, and then appreciate it for what it did, which is basically my attitude with anything from an older era which has a problematic race issue or a problematic sexism issue or anything of that nature. My cat is about to kick things off the table because he's a little shit. Number 64 is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which came out in 1975 and is directed by MILOŠ Forman. Of course, Jack Nicholson is the lead here, and he plays this character, Randall McMurphy, and he goes to this mental hospital, and the film's kind of this game between him and Nurse Ratched, who is the head nurse there. And ultimately, it's about him inspiring the other patients to rebel. And it's a really, it's a very funny film in a lot of places and very bleak in others. I love the ending of this film. The film, I mean, it's been parodied a lot, but I genuinely love the ending. And I'm lucky enough that when I saw this for the first time, I don't think I'd ever seen any of the parodies of it. And I certainly didn't remember seeing them anyway. And I thought the movie has a lot of heart and a lot to explore in terms of treating mental, patients in mental hospitals, if I can say that goddamn sentence. Like, it has a lot to say about that. It has a lot to say about humanity, a lot to say about the treatment of others, and almost the personal grudges that are kind of in there. Nurse Ratched becomes a character that you as the audience really come to hate, and you see her directly as the antagonist. And as the film goes on, I do think you slowly see that as much as she's technically doing her job, it does feel a little bit vindictive. It feels like she goes above and beyond what she's really supposed to do. And Jack Nicholson is this fire that kind of inspires people, and he's not willing to let his spirit go. And well, of course, he does need help. The help that he gets from Nurse Ratched, it does not work. It's this toxic kind of circle of retaliation, and it's a wonderful film. And I've never read the book or anything like that, but the performances are great. I think Christopher Lloyd's in there, and Danny DeVito's in there, funnily enough. Both of whom were on Taxi. I'm just remembering that. Oh, Michael Berryman was in there. I forgot about that. Clearly, I need to watch this again. I really should. We should review this at some point, because it's a phenomenal film. And I remember it's one of those movies where I got to the end, and the ending was such an uplifting moment. And that's not to say it's a happy ending, because it it isn't entirely. So, but it's kind of the fate of the human spirit is what I'd call it. I'd almost call it a slightly different version of Cool Hand Luke, if you've ever seen that, which is Paul Newman in prison, and that's a lot about his fighting spirit and his desire to not be broken by his captors, essentially. And that's not to say that he shouldn't be in prison, and that in this case Jack Nicholson shouldn't be in the mental hospital, but it's this idea of how to treat a patient like this and how to handle them, and how the injustice of when that's done incorrectly. And I think, it's one that I do need to revisit. I feel like I'd have way more to say if it had been like not over 10 years since I'd seen this, but it's one where the emotions that I felt when watching it have stuck with me, and I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it. So One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is really good, and there is that Nurse Ratched TV show still coming from Netflix, I believe, unless it came quietly and I didn't know about it. But so we'll see how that turns out, but the film's fantastic. Number 63 is Ghostbusters, 1984, Ivan Reitman director. This is one of the best comedies of all time, and a lot of my favourite comedies tend to be mixed with other genres. It's never just a straight comedy, it's a comedy mixed, in this case, there's ghosts and horror and stuff like that. And why does this movie work? It works because you have a fantastic cast. Most of all, Bill Murray, who is just killing it. But obviously, Howard Ramis is in there; he's really great. Dan Aykroyd's great. Sigourney Weaver's fantastic. Even Rick Moranis in this smaller role, or William Atherton is the villain, and Ernie Hudson is the great straight man in the movie. And this movie is so dense with jokes, and it's one of the things where I think I loved it as a kid because of the story and because of the ghosts and because of the idea of the Ghostbusters coming together and the cool proton packs in the car and all that stuff. As an adult, watching it through the ages and getting it on DVD and then eventually Blu-ray and so on and so on, it's such a witty film. There's so many jokes. Like, one of my favorite jokes in this movie is right early on when he asks the woman who's seen the ghost in the library, "Are you menstruating right now?" And the head librarian's like, "What's that got to do with anything?" And Bill Murray looks at him dead serious and says, "Back off, I'm a scientist." That is a really funny line. And it's nothing that I would have laughed at as a kid. It's something that, like, I almost discovered a whole nother reason to love this movie growing up, where all the humour started to click in ways that it never did as a kid. And, what about the Twinkie? And it's true, this man has no penis. Like, all these jokes are so great. And it's so witty, the jokes are so fast-paced, but the plot's also really good. And you care about this central kind of budding romance with Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver. And, of course, the three guys form this idea of the Ghostbusters, this idea of, it's like firefighters, but for ghosts, where they get a call and they go out and they're painted white hearse with their logo on it. And they got a kick-ass theme song, and everything about it is just glorious in every single way. And Winston gets a bad rap because there's so many video games from like the time period and like the Nintendo Entertainment System and stuff like that where they just left off Winston, and it sucks. And it feels a little bit racist, but it sucks because he's always like the forgotten fourth member. And Winston is great in this. He's such the straight man who's just reacting to the absurdity, and he's a perfect addition to the movie. I always get a smile when we get to the point in the movie when he shows up. But the cast across the board is fantastic, and it's got so many iconic moments. The "We Got One" when they finally get a call, all that stuff. It's got great practical effects. It's just such an inventive film that's firing in so many cylinders. It is lightning in a bottle, and I actually really like Ghostbusters 2. It's obviously got a lot of problems. It's obviously got sequelitis up the ass, but I still really like Ghostbusters 2. I dig Ghostbusters 2. But Ghostbusters is something else. Number 62 is Save the Green Planet, which came out in 2003 and is directed by JOON-HWAN. If I'm pronouncing that correct. Apologies if I'm not. This is another Korean film, and much like I said earlier, Korean films often have this way of balancing a lot of tones and genres. This film is about a young person, a young adult, who believes the aliens are invading the Earth, and he actually kidnaps people, thinking that they're aliens and that they're in on it, and is trying to save the planet. Thinks that he is single-handedly waging this war on aliens. And the beautiful thing about this film is that for the majority of it, up until the very end, and obviously I'm not going to spoil it, you really aren't quite sure if he is just crazy or if there's some truth to what he's saying, because he comes off as crazy so much. And he's kind of dangerous, but it's kind of in this really weird, lovable way. There's a lot of humor in this film, but there's a lot of like darkness in its undertones, and it's kind of this beautiful examination of this character, but it's also this wild ride. And it's one of these films where I just blind bought the DVD back in like 2004 or 5 and just watched it and was like amazed with how much I was into it. I was just so into this film. And I recommend it to people all the time. I recommend it as... It's kind of just this movie. You can almost imagine the director just with this giant smile on his face the entire time, because it's just this delightful film. But it has so much heart. And I think that's one of the things that I love about Korean films, is the way they balance all that stuff. And it comes off as genuine. There's no jarring transitions. There's no like weird awkwardness to it. It just works in a way that movies from Hollywood just can't do. And Save the Green Planet is great. Number 61 is BUBBA HO-TEP, which came out in 2002, directed by Don Coscarelli. And BUBBA HO-TEP is, in many ways, the ultimate Bruce Campbell movie. Bruce Campbell plays Elvis, who, instead of dying, is in an old folks' home. He switched bodies with an Elvis impersonator. Well, not switched bodies, sorry. He switched places with an Elvis impersonator before his death, because he wanted out of the famous lifestyle. So he switched places rather with this impersonator, and it was the impersonator who died. And instead, the real Elvis is in an old folks' home in the then present day of 2002, and him and a black man who believes he is JFK and has been altered so that no one knows that it's really him. Who, as Elvis says in the film, he may be certifiable, but he's a good friend. They team up to take on a mummy who is stealing souls from the people of this old folks' home. And I guess I would call it a horror comedy in a broad sense. This movie is like one of my favorite B movies. It is so obviously there's a sense of humor to it. There's a layer of comedy and there's a layer of silliness, but it's so endearing. It never feels like it's making fun of anyone that it's talking about. It feels like it's actually honoring Elvis, despite the fact that it's in this ridiculous premise. And JFK as well, to an extent. Ozzie Davis as JFK is fantastic. Who passed away quite a while ago now, but he's great as JFK. Or the man who may be JFK is maybe a mark, but you want to believe him. You really want to believe him, and the music is fantastic. I love the soundtrack, and the great thing is the soundtrack, the score is by Brian Tyler, who has since become one of the regular composers for a lot of Hollywood movies. He did some of the Expendables movies. He's done other things that aren't coming to mind, but he's done a lot of stuff in the last, say, 10 years. He's become kind of a proper Hollywood composer. Not that there's anything not proper about this film, but this was kind of like a more humble beginning in the earlier part of his career. And it's got such a great set of music. And another thing, I've said this about a few films so far in this part, but this has so much heart. Like, you really believe this sort of redemption story of trying to save these other people. And there's a scene in particular where one old person gets it, as it were, that is genuinely very sad, and the way that the characters react to it has so much like heart, and the music's just perfect, and you buy into it and you really feel it. I love BUBBA HO-TEP. I think this is better than any of the Evil Dead movies, and I know that's blasphemy to some people, but BUBBA HO-TEP, baby. BUBBA HO-TEP. Number 60 is Double Indemnity, which is directed by Billy Wilder and came out in 1944. This was the first Billy Wilder film I think I saw, and was kind of blown away by it because it's such a slick film. It's a thriller, it's got double crossing, it's got femme fatales, it's got all these different things. And it's not, like, film noir is not necessarily a genre that I would have said was something that I was in love with, until I started seeing films like Double Indemnity and went, oh, this is how good they can be. Okay, never mind. I take it back. I take it back. There's tons of good film noir. Not that I didn't like the film noir I'd seen before, but this raised it to a whole new level for me, and kind of cemented Billy Wilder as one of my favorite directors of this era, of the sort of 40s, 50s kind of era. And this film, you know, it's about this plot to kill this woman's husband so that she'll get like double insurance, and her and the insurance salesman are plotting to do this, but there's double crosses left and right. There's just great dialogue between the characters. Like, I'm trying to think of who to compare it to in terms of dialogue. Like, it's definitely more of its time, but it's so effortless. It's the way it flows back and forth between them. It's, you know, I don't want to say anything ridiculous, like it's like the Tarantino of the time, because it's not that, but just in the sense that it's so beautifully woven together. And that's true of a lot of Wilder's films. I can think of another couple of examples. And yeah, I was just hooked into the plot. The plot is so good. You really feel like this came from a time when film was being so inventive, because it was still relatively the early days and people were trying so many things. Now, this could be based on a book for all I know, but it feels like, even if it was, it feels like they were having a ball with saying, okay, how can we do this and make it work in film? How can we play this off and build this tale of suspense? And just fantastic. Billy Wilder is just a genius filmmaker, and this is one of the examples of that. Number 59 is The Goonies, which of course is directed by Richard Donner and came out in 1985. This is a movie that I grew up with, unsurprisingly. This is one that I had taped off TV from a very early age and watched probably to death in a certain age range. And like a lot of movies that I watched a lot of as a kid, there was this period where I kind of like thought I only wanted to watch mature things. But then a few years, and not a long period, we're talking maybe, you know, from 11 to 13, 14. And then there was a period where, as I was buying a lot of DVDs, I started buying stuff that I loved from my childhood and watched them again for the first time in a while. So this is not quite the same as Basil the Great Mouse Detective, and it wasn't that much of a gap. But I remember, you know, getting the DVD, seeing it in its original aspect ratio for the first time. And this was back in the day when I had time to watch or listen to all the commentary tracks. And I remember this one having a fun one, and just being like filled with this feeling of like, no, there's a reason why I love this as a kid. You know, some stuff you like as a kid doesn't age well and doesn't like grow up with you. And then some stuff you watch and go, no, there's a reason why I love this, and it's actually a fantastic movie. And as a kid, I never knew that the director was the same director as Superman, so there's like a couple of references where I'm like, whoa, yeah, this is great. Like Richard Donner's referencing Superman. that's great, especially since obviously there was such a falling out with the producers that led to him not finishing 2 and not coming back for any more. So it's great to see him kind of play with it a little bit. Great cast. It's that thing that I love about 80s movies. It's the group of kids going on an adventure. Their chemistry together is fantastic. You've got fun villains chasing after them. Joey Pants being one of the big ones, and you've got a few cast members who didn't really grow up to be actors. You've got a few other cast members who are obviously well known. Josh Brolin's well known. Sean Astin. Corey Feldman, of course, is kind of this weird middle ground where he's still known for being an actor, but isn't really. I mean, he's still in things, but he's not exactly in big movies by any means. So no, like, it's so fun. It's exactly like I've always described this movie as like, you know, they legitimately go on this adventure because it's a rainy like afternoon on like a Saturday or a Sunday, and it feels like that. It captures that feeling of a bunch of kids together with nothing to do and then making an adventure for themselves. It just happens to be that the adventure turns out to be real, and they end up in this underground chase with these villains, looking for there's just such a spirit to the film. There's a spirit to its sense of adventure, And it's something that I genuinely believe they mostly don't make movies like this anymore. I have a hard time buying into stuff like this now, because it just doesn't feel, this feels like the kids all feel appropriate. It's kind of the thing that Stranger Things has tapped into, where the kids still feel like they're saying shit. They're saying things like shit. They feel like kids of that age where they're actually acting like it, as opposed to a lot of kids stuff now where the kids have to act super young so that it's appropriate for everyone. Whereas this is okay if it's I mean, I don't know if it's PG-13, but it's at least PG. They at least have a bit of an edge to the kids where it feels realistic. And yeah, so the Goonies never say die. Number 58 is Predator, 1987, John McTiernan directing. Of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger in there as the hero, as our main guy. And I talked about this not too long ago in depth, so it's actually quite easy to talk about this one and kind of sum it up. Of course, there's an alien. This Predator is in the jungle, and Arnold and his team go in to not for that reason, they go in to rescue, well, they believe they're going to rescue. It's a bit of a trick on Carl Weathers' part, but they end up going to this camp and they have to get out of the jungle. And of course, the Predator shows up, who's this alien from this other world who's here just to hunt like alpha predators from Earth, which in this case are a bunch of muscly 80s action men. That's essentially what the premise of this movie is. And for me, it actually kind of plays upon a lot of slasher movie tropes. It takes the idea of, like, instead of having a group of teenagers and attractive, young women, we'll have the biggest, baddest, muscly action men we can possibly find. And the idea is that the action sort of tropes are deconstructed along with the slasher movie tropes one by one as they're taken down by this ultimate villain. And Arnold in this movie kind of becomes the final girl. That's kind of what he is. And it becomes this mano-a-mano fight, and it builds... It's action filmmaking. It's not a deep story. This story is not that... It's really simple. There's not much to the story. It's great in its execution. It's the filmmaking. It's the way it's structured. It builds up to the final fight. We get to see them in their prime in the first part of the film when they're taking on this little camp full of the bad guys. And we get to have the action blowout there. But then as the film goes on, it then takes them and one by one deconstructs them by killing some of them, obviously the Predator and so on and so on. Wonderful score by Alan Silvestri that suits the film beautifully. And yeah, alien design by Stan Winston is also phenomenal. It's such an iconic look. And the teases of the Predator, his technology, his weapon set, all that stuff, everything. It's a very simple B-movie concept that is executed to basically perfection. And there's a reason why there's a ton of knockoffs that are made for really cheap that are all terrible because it's just the nature of it. Because it's something, yeah, we can go into a forest and shoot a Predator knockoff, sure. But the execution, the way it builds, the way it's directed, all that stuff is what makes it what it is. Number 57 is Superman. Funny enough, we just mentioned Superman a couple of entries ago, but 1978, Richard Donner again, probably maybe the closest two entries by the same director on this list, at least so far. I don't know, maybe there'll be one back to back later that I've not remembered, but Superman, big part of my childhood and a big reason why I grew up a DC Comics fan, even though I'd never touched a comic book until I was in my late teens. And there's just such a sense of hope. There's such a sense of wonder in this film. I think one of the things that this film does that, is lost in some modern superhero movies, and even a lot of the good ones, is the sense of cinematic awe that it inspires. It has these sweeping shots in the field, the cornfield, as he's leaving home for the first time. It has these beautiful shots of this practically built Krypton miniature. It has... all these great things, and you've got these veteran actors in some of the roles, as Lex or as Jor-El or whatever. But Christopher Reeve is such a dream casting. Margot Kidder's very good as well, of course. Not my favorite Lois, actually, all things considered, but a very solid Lois. And Christopher Reeve is perfect. He's perfect to represent Superman. And it's not a perfect movie. Like, it's one of the things where over-analyzing things like Man of Steel and, coming to terms why that movie's so unsatisfying as a Superman fan, you realize that there are some problems in the original Superman movie. There are things that aren't there that I feel like should be, but it gets so much right. It gets the feeling right. It gets the feeling of his character right. Even if it misses some story beats that I would like, because arguably the weakest part of this movie is the story. I think that's a fair thing to say, but Reeve is so perfect. The music is like, what's a better word for perfect? What's more perfect than perfect? John Williams' Superman theme is transcendent. I'll say it right now. John Williams' score for Superman is better than his score for Star Wars. I will die in that hill, because Superman is full of classic cues and themes. The main theme is, I heard it best from Richard Donner himself in one of the DVD extras or whatever, maybe even that great documentary that was made in 2006 when Returns was coming out. The main chorus of the Superman theme literally sounds like it's saying the word Superman. That is beautiful, and it sounds right, and it's hopeful and heroic, and it's everything you want. It's a colorful movie. It's a bright, colorful movie, and it's this magical experience from being a kid. There's a sense of wonder that's just missing from a lot of superhero movies for me, that otherwise should have them. Obviously, the newer Superman movies being the main culprits, and yeah, like, and obviously Marvel are doing a great job. Obviously, I think the big competition for me with these is the Dark Knight trilogy. Maybe more on some of that later, but it's this idea that, like, that Dark Knight trilogy in many ways, well, not without its faults, is perfect for that version of Batman, and it feels like a truly realized film version of a very specific Batman. This movie feels in many ways like a truly realized version of Superman, again, despite any flaws that it may have. You know, I can nitpick this, I can nitpick the Batman movies that I love, but ultimately there's so much that it gets right, and the feeling of wonder in this is just pure joy. And the filmmaking's, I would argue that the one thing that this movie has over a lot of the Marvel movies is the fundamental filmmaking. I think this movie looks better than all of those. I think this movie just has better direction than all of those. You know, for as much as I like a lot of those Marvel movies, I don't think they have that special feeling of this is a film. And that sounds really pretentious, I know, but Superman feels like a film. It feels like the Gone with the Wind of superhero movies. Dark Knight feels like the heat of superhero movies. And yeah, and that sounded really pretentious to say. And here's the thing: outside of these examples, Marvel's kicking DC's ass, because it has fun scripts that respects its characters. It has the big, story that's building over all these movies. It has a lot of great things going for it. I am not shitting on them, but ultimately, as much as I love, say, the first Avengers, and I loved that movie, I saw it multiple times in the theaters. It's so good because of its characters, because it's dialogue, because of so many things, but it looks like a TV show compared to Superman the movie. It just does. And a lot of the Marvel movies look like TV shows, so either TV shows or just badly CG backgrounds. Like, those are the feelings I get a lot in those movies. The visual style is not their strong suit. So Superman is beautiful, it sounds amazing, it sounds perfect, Reeve is perfect, there's so much going on. And then, of course, the fact that I grew up with this, and I get giddy every time I watch it when the music starts. I remember getting the DVD for the first time, having not seen it in a number of years because I was kind of away from the superheroes, and it was actually Batman Begins that made me realize I kind of love superheroes still. And as well as, reading some comics, I went back and said, hey, I like those Superman movies, I want to buy them. And I got them on DVD, and I had 5.1 sound. I'm one of the few teenagers that had 5.1 sound, because it was like a big deal to me, and I wanted to do it. And hearing the 5.1 mix of the opening title, all the titles that fly past the screen, and just hearing them swoosh past my head while the main theme played, was this magical rediscovery of, like, part of my childhood. And I've never let it go since. So, Superman. Number 56 is Black Christmas, something very different from the last movie. This came out in 1974 and is directed by Bob Clark. This is a film that I saw again for the first time in DVD. There's so many movies that I found and sought out in my teenage years, and horror was a big part of that. Black Christmas is often referred to as like a precursor to the slasher genre, and it came before Halloween. It's a film where we're at a sorority house. In fact, actually, funny coincidence, Margot Kidder, who's Lois Lane in Superman, is also in Black Christmas, just a few years prior. So that's actually really cool. I didn't do that on purpose. This is the second time that's happened, because we had... Oh, who did we have in the first part? we had someone early on. I want to say it was someone in History of It. I think it was Ed Harris. Was it Ed Harris? It was Ed Harris. Anyway, Black Christmas is a film at a sorority house where they start getting very obscene phone calls over the Christmas period. And of course, because it's Christmas, a lot of the girls are leaving to go home for the holidays. And we have our main characters who are left around, and there's these obscene phone calls, and they are obscene. They're, there's C-bombs being dropped and things like that. And I don't want to spoil anything, but let's just say there's a line that reveals the twist in this movie, which, actually, you know what? It's not really a spoiler now that I think about it. We actually, as the audience, we actually know this basically from the start of the movie. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, this isn't a spoiler because the movie tells us this before they even get a phone call. I'm sure it does. Yeah, so the famous thing that people always joke about, and we get a lot of parodies of in TV and movies, is the calls are coming from inside the house. That's this movie. The obscene caller, and who's also a killer and is killing people over the course of the film, is inside the house. He's in the attic. And we actually know that right early on. I think I'm right in saying that's not a spoiler. There's a big reveal of it, but not for us. It's for the characters, of course. John Saxon's in here, who I love. He's one of those character actors who pops up in a lot of horror movies from the 70s and 80s. And it's just got such a grimy little tone. I love it so much. It feels so dark and insidious. And the Christmas season is perfect. This idea of it's supposed to be something sweet and nice and jolly, but it's actually this time when they're more vulnerable because there's less people around, and it's perverting this thing. Some of the kills are very visceral. I've heard some complaints about some of the acting and things like that, and I think for the most part it's fine. But for me, it's just this great capture of a period in time, and I love elements of the killer. Like, I love that we never really, like, the identity of the killer is never really important, and it doesn't really matter, and it's just kind of what it is. And I love that. I love the slow build. I love the imagery of using Christmas decorations at various points. You know, the poster's got the girl with the plastic bag over her face who's suffocated. That's on the poster, so that's not a spoiler. And you know, all these scenes are just really well executed, and I think it's just a great grimy. Like, it feels. One of the things I always complain about when I'm talking about Rob Zombie movies is how he's really going for that 70s Texas Chainsaw feel, but it feels really dirty to watch, and you just want to shower afterwards. It's really inauthentic. Whereas when you actually watch Texas Chainsaw, or in this case Black Christmas, which is not this to the same extent, this is not as grimy as Texas Chainsaw, but it's just enough in its film stock and its tone that it feels just a little bit seedy. And because of that, it gives it this tone where you feel like you're even as an adult, I'm watching this, I feel like I'm sneaking in a movie that I'm not supposed to be watching because I'm not old enough. You know, I feel like a teen or a young, like a 12-year-old who's gotten a hold of Black Christmas, and I get to watch this little nasty movie. And yeah, it's great. I love it. It's up there in some of my favorite horror movies. Number 55, speaking of horror movies, is Nosferatu the Vampire, or Nosferatu Phantom der Nacht, to go with its original German title. Directed by Werner Herzog, who's a director I love. It's came out in 1979. It is a remake of course, the original German Nosferatu from the 20s. And it stars Klaus Kinski as Count Dracula, which is amazing. Such perfect casting. This is one of my favorite vampire movies, and it gets such a unique tone for me. It feels so operatic in its nature. You know, watching it again, because we did it, I think, for Oktoberthon last year on Scream, so I got to see it relatively recently, and it's got such this the music that it's got this almost apocalyptic. It almost feels like the kind of Lovecraftian like sense of dread of the coming doom to it. It has that kind of feeling of like one's Count Olaf, or in this case not Olaf, that's Lemony Snicket's thingamajig, Orloff. One's Dracula, because it was Orloff in the original because they didn't have the rights to Dracula. Once he gets to the mainland, as it were, he gets to civilization, you feel like absolute, like the apocalypse is coming. And it's got great visuals. The performance by Kinski is great. The journey to the castle early on, from Harker is this wonderful just. And because Herzog's got this thing where a lot of his movies are about man versus nature and surviving in nature and how harsh it can be, and he kind of uses that a little bit of that in The Journey too. Like just this trek that he has to take, and all this scenery with this choir singing over it, this haunting choir. It's got such a unique feeling for a horror movie. And I love it. It's one of those things where I'm like, I wish he did more horror. Like Herzog does a lot of different types of movie, but I wish there was a little bit more horror in his filmography because he's fantastic at it. Number 54 is Gravity, directed by Alfonso Cuarón from 2013. This is a movie which might get some flack. I know there's been some kind of weird backlash to this in a lot of ways since it came out and was so loved by many, but this for me is one of the greatest cinematic experiences I've had in this decade, where I went in. It's such a simple premise. It's just surviving when something goes awry on the on the space station, and Sandra Bullock is left very quickly on her own to fend for herself. Naturally, it's a relatively quiet movie, but not a lot of dialogue. I mean, there's some, but it's not a ton. There's a lot of her on her own, and it's the harshness of space. But the beautiful thing, like a lot of science fiction, is the idea that it's really about her character and what she's going through. It's not really about just surviving in space. And her arc is fantastic. It's such a beautiful movie. It looks great all the time. The effects are stunning. I never really questioned the visuals of it at all, which is so impressive. And for people who say that you need to see it in 3D, I never did. I had given up on 3D by this point. I didn't care. I saw this multiple times in theaters, and none of them were in 3D. And I loved it in 2D. I love it. I love it at home. I've seen it at home, and I think it still works. So, and for me, I will say this. If a movie does not work on your TV screen at home, then it's not that great a movie. And it never was. If it needs the big screen to work, then it's at least partly a failure to me. And I know movies are made for theaters, they're made for big screens and all that, but if your movie's engaging, if your movie's good, it shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't. And while I would never watch a movie on a phone, it should work on a phone, even then. Like, it should. If it's good enough, it'll work. And I think Gravity is a movie where it is spectacle, it's adrenaline, it's adventure, it's this fight for survival. And it's one of these things where it's such a simple premise, I just get into it. And I can't not mention the score. The score is phenomenal. There's a couple of tracks towards the end on the soundtrack that play out over the last, like, maybe 10 minutes of the film that I think is just phenomenal. I listened to those two tracks so much after this movie came out. I was so in love with it. And I think it's just a beautiful film that has a really simple story, but it means a lot. And yeah, it is an exercise in simple technical mastery, and I'll stick up for it. I'll stick up for Gravity. Number 53 is Thief, which is Michael Mann's film, came out in 1981 and stars James Caan. This is a film about a thief, a really, obviously, but a very sort of high-class jewel thief who does these big jobs where they get past all the alarms, they get in, he's very good at what he does. And he starts a relationship with a woman and wants to get out of the business, but he's tempted in, for this one big job that he wants to do. And ultimately, there's a lot of slick scenes. The opening 10 minutes of them pulling off this heist is so good. This film has such a great visual style and tone. Michael Mann is a phenomenal visual director, and it has this slick feel to it the entire time, but at the same time feels a little bit grimy. And you have this character who wants to get out of this life, but he's not allowed to get out of it, and this leads to conflict. It leads to conflict with people who have hired him in the past, and it becomes this idea of this character and how, can he get out of this life? If he can, then what's it going to take, and how dangerous is it to those who cares about? And the film explores all this, and the final 10-20 minutes of this movie is so good. In fact, I would recommend, me and Connor did this for In Flux. We did a full discussion on this and talked about the whole movie. And I love talking about this one because Michael Mann isn't like a super like he wears his subtext on his sleeve, and you can kind of like analyze his movies without having to think about it too much. But he always just takes it and executes it so well that it doesn't matter. And it's true for a lot of his movies, it really is. But this movie is one that I didn't see until Blu-ray. It was the Criterion Blu-ray I got of this, and I just loved it. And I was looking forward to it because I like Michael Mann. I like a lot of his movies. And this was just this great performance by James Caan, this study of a character in sort of his desire to have a better life where he's not a criminal, where he's not this thing anymore, where he kind of wants to be a better person, and what it's going to take to get out of that. And it's riveting stuff. And I watched it again. I saw it for the first time a few years ago. I watched it again to review, I think sometime last year, and was, if anything, I liked it more the second time. So Thief holds up for me. Number 52 is Django Unchained. Yep, this is above Pulp Fiction. I'm probably going to get some comments for that. Here's the thing. I don't often see Django Unchained ranked very highly on people's Tarantino lists. And people have different Tarantino tastes. Some prefer a lot of the other movies. Some prefer the more, Pulp Fiction-y. Some love Inglourious Basterds, and maybe that'll be up higher on this list. You'll find out. But Django Unchained for me is kind of where I really get into my element with Tarantino. I at least really like, if not love, all of Tarantino's movies. The guy is so good with script, and he's gotten better and better with direction. I think this movie is wonderfully directed. But this, to me, despite the fact that the subject matter sounds like it should be a really kind of serious, depressing movie, and it does have some serious beats that play off really, really honestly because of its subject, because, Jamie Foxx plays this slave who is bought by Christoph Waltz, who doesn't like slavery, and says, I'm going to, I'll happily free you once you help me get to this man, because he wants to take out this slaver, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. And it's the story of Jamie Foxx becoming this gunslinging hero. That is what the movie is. And doesn't have a lot in common with the original Django movies. It's not really meant to be a remake of them. It's meant to just be like a kind of, to honor the title of it, I guess, more than anything else. But first of all, those three leads are all fantastic in this movie. The dialogue is slick as ever, but this is fun Tarantino. There's so many great action scenes in this. It's a real hero story. The bromance, if you want to call it that, between Fox and Waltz. And it's so funny because Waltz was like the bastard, like, he was the biggest bastard in Inglourious Basterds, and Jamie Foxx and his like bromance in this is genuinely quite touching, and there's moments that really get me. And it actually says a lot of great, interesting things, and a lot of like hard-hitting things about the time period, about race relations, if you want to even call it that. It feels like a really weird way to say it, but like, it has a lot of things to say about that, whilst also being this ridiculously fun like journey of a hero. There's that really funny moment the first time he kind of stands up to be a hero, where he's in this ridiculous outfit that he's picked out for himself. But we get the hero shot, that low angle track in where he's the hero, and the music has the horn blare. And as much as it's kind of silly and you laugh, it feels like a big deal. And I almost want to compliment Tarantino for pulling off what I was saying Hollywood can't normally do, because there is actually almost a little bit of that South Korean magic in here, where he's dancing around this really serious topic with some really heartfelt things, but has genuinely a lot of humor. A lot of silly humor at that, with a real hero story. So I loved it. I saw this like 3 times in theaters. I loved that Django Unchained. And for me, this hits just like, this is one of those beats that I love. There's even a hilarious scene with the KKK where they're arguing about something stupid, and it's just this. He knows how to take these things and turn them into a great exploration of what he's doing, but also just pure entertainment at the same time. And this movie's phenomenal, and I love it, Django Unchained, and I will not apologize for liking it more than Pulp Fiction. You can't make me. And the final number on this video, The Iron Giant, is number 51, which came out in 1999 and is directed by Brad Bird. Only my second animated film, I think, on this list, unless I'm forgetting one. Iron Giant is a loving movie with so much heart, and it speaks to me in so many levels. And it's one of these things where when I got older and went back and revisited it and realized why it was so good, and realized that, oh, Brad Bird's this great director, what the hell's happening here? And I think it's notable that this movie for me is higher on this list than Superman the movie. It's not a big leap between them, but The Iron Giant in many ways is the best Superman movie ever made. It has that heart. It has some different themes to it, of course. Superman factors into the plot in terms of how the kids, because it's about a young boy who encounters this giant alien robot and befriends him, and it ultimately becomes about the choice to be what you want to be and not being what you're expected to be, which is a wonderful message for a kid's movie, if nothing else. But it also has this idea of choosing to be something good, which ties into Superman. And the kid uses Superman to kind of relate to him and say, hey, you're kind of like them because you came from space. And this movie, like, the friendship between them is so beautiful, but you also have great visuals. It's got that pulpy 50s look to it the whole time. I mean, it's set in 1957, so it's very much intentional, but it very much captures that. The posters capture that feel. And much like the actual Superman movie, the thing that I praised over a lot of modern superhero movies that should have this tone is that this has the wonder, it has the awe, it has all these things. But there's something special in this where instead of the Kents being the one to kind of inspire the alien to be good, it's this young boy. It's this boy who is this childlike wonder and childlike understanding of the world that's almost works, because one of the things that's people critique with Superman is unrealistic that he's that good. It's boring that he's that good. But the beautiful thing, and I disagree with that, I think that's the point of Superman is how hard it is for him to maintain that in the world with so much cynicism and jadedness and so on and so on. The idea that he has to maintain that the whole time is part of what's, that's difficult, that's hard, that is the struggle of Superman in a lot of ways. But the idea that in this, that the raw just, no, this is good and this is bad, and you just don't cross that line, comes from a kid whose understanding of good and bad is a lot more simple, and maybe hasn't been made jaded by, years of growing up and things throughout his life. The idea that he teaches this being to try, or at least tries to, and I won't spoil where the movie goes, but it's a magical film that I think is exactly the sort of message that kids should see and believe in. And the idea of not being prejudiced, of course, because obviously as soon as the military find out about this thing, they just want to blow it up and so on, because it's different and it's not one of us. There's messages to be read in there as well. So The Iron Giant is a fitting movie to close out this part, because it's a wonderful film. There you go. That has been numbers 75 through 51. This has been part 2 of my top 100 films. Hopefully you got some recommendations in there, you enjoyed some of my commentary, or whatever you're getting out of these. I just hope you're getting something. But I'll remind you once again here at the end that you can submit your own top 50 movies to mftvquestions@gmail.com. Just make sure they're numbered so that I know which is number 1 and which is number 50 and so on. And they will get points based on where they place, and there'll be a results show for all the entries that are given in next month. The deadline is at the end of August 2019, and I'm saying the year just in case you're watching this much later. So send them in, and there's been some have come in already. I've had a few already, and I've been entering them into my database where I'm giving them points and accumulating things. Very excited to see how that turns out. So please do that. And if you did enjoy this content, if you did enjoy me rambling on about movies and everything else that we do on this channel or on the audio podcast, please do consider supporting us by giving us a good rating on your audio podcast app, or going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, where you can support us for as little as $1 per month and keep content coming. And if you're a fan of this particular, because this is not something that I do often, this is sort of a little mini project I had as an idea in between all of the regular review content that we do. If you like this and want more little mini things like this and ideas like this, by myself every so often, maybe occasionally bring the others in to get involved with it, then let me know, and we'll see what we can do. So yeah, go to Patreon, check out all the stuff you can get over there for as little as $1 per month. Go and have a look. Otherwise, check out all the stuff we've got. Of course, we review movies. We've got a horror movie podcast called Screams After Midnight. You should check that out. We have a sci-fi movie podcast called The Ace, The Atomic Cinema Experiment. You can check that out. And yeah, go have a look at these things and have a look see. So that has been part 2 of this series. I will see you next time for part 3. Thank you so much for joining me. Keep watching movies, guys, and if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.